What's up? I'm Pete Crane. I'm here at the studio of Ben Bulig. Ben is my bandmate in Shiver. We make the music together, and Ben has a much more impressive music studio than mine. So now I'm going to hand off to Ben to take us through his cool gear.
Okay, so what I'm essentially going to do today is literally just walk across the room and talk about each bit of gear. So it's actually coincidental that this bass was the first thing in the line. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just as full disclosure, because I'm sure this looks really weird, is I sit on the floor when I work. I've always done it and I always will. I have nothing against tables like in general, but I don't own them. So anyway, I was actually going to, just start with this bass as the first thing that was in the row of things. However, full disclosures, I'm not really a bass player. I go through a thing where about once a year or once every 2 years, I become enormously preoccupied with the fact that I'm a musician that doesn't really play an instrument. And when that happens, I sort of default back into, well, I need to play an instrument and I can play a little bit of bass. So that will usually result in some spending money on bass stuff. So in the last iteration of that, I actually bought this, which is a Warwick double Corvette, made in Germany. It's an extremely nice bass, and even though I don't actually play it very much, I'm very glad that I own it. Mostly in the sense that it's pretty much as good a bass as you can buy. I can no longer pretend that my bass playing is held back by anything. So it just sits there being awesome. I'm sure I haven't actually played it much this year, but I'm sure I'll come back to it and I'll be very glad that I have it. And I also just want to show you, I'm not sure how well this will be picked up. Look at that neck. It is gorgeous. It is a gorgeous thing to have in your hand.
It is lovely. Why did you go with a 5-string?
Mainly because I thought I was missing out. So in that sense, because all my other basses are 4-string, I wanted the lower range. I think 6-string basses are kind of stupid, to be honest. You know, you're getting into a range that you have no business in being in. But to have that lower register is obviously all about your business, so why not? It is a pain in the ass to transition, or at least it was for me. I'm very much attached to knowing, that's a G. And when that stopped being a G, then, oh my God, that was a real mindfuck. You do get used to it pretty easily though, so yeah, all good. So you are just going to sit back in your corner, and the next time I am having a bout of insecurity about not being a real musician, I will get you out and play you for a few months. So back to the corner with you, and getting into the stuff that I actually use. Though interestingly, as we pan across, obviously the computer's there and that's where I do everything. So it does tend to sort of radiate across from most used gear to least used gear. So we're actually starting with the least used. Not that it's bad or anything, it's just, it all has different purposes. And some are sort of more into what I'm doing at the moment than others. So if we were to actually just get to this rack, before we dive into the modular stuff, we might as well start with the non-modular stuff. So what we have here is a Vermona drum machine. 2 expanders. Well, that's the expander for the Moog Voyager. And that's sort of a CV tool essentially for the Moog Voyager. It's made by Moog. And that's a Sherman filter bank. Just going back first to the drum machine. So in Shiver, Pete does the drums. I do not do the drums. And obviously the kind of sound that we have in Shiver is not really that analog drum sound. So I got this with the idea that I was going to do other things. I have used it occasionally more for like little effects and things like that. It's very good at what it is. You'll never get like samples that are as punchy or as obviously as editable as this. But I mean, I don't listen to a lot of music that has analog drum machines. I have it. I'm glad I have it. It is very good if you're into that kind of thing. And of course, having that sort of modern, more modern integration than say you'd get out of a TR-808 or something like that is wonderful. But, it's there. I haven't turned it on for a while. These two obviously belong to the Moog Voyager, and essentially what it is I have a Moog Voyager. It was my first analog synth, incidentally, and of course I was kind of getting into it, and it was sort of my first toe in the water in terms of the world of modulars. So with this kind of thing, the Voyager becomes, I guess, what you call semi-modular, and that was my first sort of dipping of the toe. Since then, obviously, I've gone right into modulars, and the Moog Voyager, why bother setting up all of this when you have this? I still use the Voyager a lot, just particularly when I'm starting a song, just so I can add some additional layers that are playing in real time. But yeah, it just sort of sits there. This guy I've used to death. I love it. So if you haven't heard one, it's really essentially a distortion. It's called a filter, but really the filters are there just to create different kinds of distortion. This is lovely. It integrates really well with a modular setup because of all the options you have with the jacks. And of course, with the rack mount version, those jacks are on the front rather than the back, which is always really cool. Moving on from that, let's get to the main events. Yes. All the other things. So, like I said, I got the Moog Voyager and I sort of went semi-modular, and then I wanted to go modular. And this was quite a few years ago now. I think these days when you think modular, people just default to Eurorack. But it was a very different world back then, and what you sort of had was there was Eurorack, and it was mainly Doepfer in those days. Then there was .com, and they were really solid. They were really into doing the Moog thing, and there wasn't that much around with other manufacturers doing .com. And then there was 5U, which is what this is. And the two main guys in that were Synthesis Technology, like Paul Schreiber, and ModCan. So, I listened to everything and just went to websites trying to sort of understand how to build one. I have no background in electronics, so it was a bit of a learning curve. And in the end, after checking out loads of stuff, I decided that the stuff that sounded best to me was Synthesis Technology. So that's Paul Schreiber. He's still going today. He's still making stuff in Eurorack. But at that time, he had come up with this format, which is 5U, which is essentially the modules are 5 rack units high. And 1U going across is essentially 1 rack unit. I think that's how it works. The main difference between this and .com is that the .com panels are wider, so you get 8 units, I think, in a 19-inch rack, and this you get 10 units across. Eventually, after a lot of umming and erring, I took the plunge and I contacted Synthesis Technology and I ordered about 5 modules, and I was told they would come in 6 weeks, which passed, and then another 6 weeks and another 6 weeks, and then so on and so forth. If you're into Synthesis Technology, you probably know that period. Paul, I think, had overextended himself and just couldn't fill orders. So that went on for quite a while. And eventually I got annoyed and I wanted to get things started. So I contacted ModCan. And ModCan, got the quote, got the modules made. He said it would take 4 weeks, and it took 4 weeks, and it was all a much smoother experience. So what I actually started out with, my first set of modules was actually the ModCan modules. And what I did is I sort of just planned a really basic synth. So, I had 2 oscillators, 2 filters, I think, ADSRs, just the basic building blocks of a synth. Those came in. Obviously, ModCan modules are just fucking gorgeous. Really lovely. And that was my first sort of big step in. Now, all of this stuff is obviously stupidly expensive, so I wasn't buying things that often. But eventually I filled out the ModCan a bit, and eventually Synthesis Technology modules arrived, I think 2 years after I ordered them. And then I just continued building this, but 5U basically died. It died in this period. It's sort of like .com became the main format for large modulars, and Eurorack sort of really grew and became the beast that it is now. So it became increasingly hard to get 5U modules. So after that point, this actually became a bit of a random affair. So for example, the ModCan modules were made by Bruce. They are from ModCan. Some of the synthesis technology modules that you see here are made by Paul. Others, so for example, my oscillators, which are kind of unique in that they've got these 10-turn pots on them, were made by somebody else. So I'm just struggling to remember the name right now. Other ones in this include quite a bit from Oakley. So Oakley didn't make them. So this is Oakley Designs made by Crisp One in the UK. And then a few mystery ones. So for example, I have this Buchler LPG. I have no idea who made it. I got it secondhand. And then getting even weirder, coming over here, we've got a noise ring, which is from Weird. I no idea where this came about. Got this secondhand as well. An Ian Fritz design, which is a chaos oscillator quadrature, so it's just out of sync sort of phased LFOs. This guy, which is a digital oscillator, which I think was designed by a guy in Muffwicklers, and he put the design up on the internet. Somebody else put them together. From there, it sort of gets into really weird history. It's actually just completely coincidental. I built all of this when I was living in Bangkok. The last year or two I was in Bangkok, I met an American guy called Daniel. Hello, Daniel Gold. And he was moving to Eurorack, but he had all this 5U stuff. I basically bought whatever 5U stuff he had left as he was transitioning to the different format. And he was into that sort of, I'm into generally more bread and butter modules. I like my oscillators and my filters and so on. He was into more of the sort of West Coast synthesis, and that's where a lot of my weirder modules came from him. Because I think one of the cool things about modulars is how personal they are. So you make the choice of the modules that you want, and it says a lot about your workflow and what you're into when you actually look at how a modular's come together. So in this case, it's sort of interesting, even like the choice of modules and the layout. So I thought I'd just quickly go over that. Okay, so as far as this goes, it's pretty standard. So 3 oscillators, as you should do on your monophonic synthesizer. 2 sort of really detailed ones, which are like fully featured oscillators, and 1 sort of auxiliary one. To be honest, most of my patches use 1 oscillator. So I've got 2 in reserve. These are actually wonderful oscillators. These are synthesis technology. Tracking's perfect across 10 octaves. I think because I got these secondhand, they're probably about 15 years old now, and they're just amazing. Probably the best oscillators ever made. So 3 oscillators, perfectly standard there. However, what I'm really into, what I was really into at this time was actually wave shaping. So the idea is that you get a standard waveform like a sine, and you feed it through something that's going to change that waveform slightly. And the 2 that I've used to death are the Synthesis Technology MOTM 510, the wave shaper, and the ModCan Timbre Mod. So both of these are actually, they don't actually have the best reputation, oddly enough. I love them, but a lot of people didn't. This one is sort of a 3 input, and it's quite complicated. You can just use it as a standard wave shaper. You put 1 wave in, you turn a knob and it changes shape. But the big thing was that you could put, say, 2 oscillators in and they would interact, and it'd be sort of like a ring modulator, but more complicated. I think Paul has actually put up an explanation of the math behind this, and I do not understand it. So very good. Then there's the ModCan one, which again, a lot of people sort of didn't really like. To be honest, what I spend most of my time is with Timbre Mod B. And what I've really loved with this one is that if you put a fairly simple thing like a sine in, as you change the wave shape, you sort of morph between an octave up. And I've abused this to hell in Shiver. So a lot of those synth solos where it's sort of kind of vocal character, like sort of morphing vowel sounds, are actually this guy. And I've never seen anything that can quite do it.
What's an example? What song?
I think Disconnect, that solo.
I was just about to wonder if that was
Yeah,
Disconnect.
Disconnect, and I think Cheshire Grin as well. They both used it. So basically, you've just got your patch playing that's moving either by hand or by, an LFO or something. But that's been really important. This is one of my sort of desert island ones. Interestingly, I don't use timbre mod. I don't use the phaser. It's just this little thing with its one knob takes care of business. The other one which I find really important is I've got a sub oscillator on this, and this one's pretty cool. This is cool in the sense that it does not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 octaves down. So yeah, that was really what I'm into, just oscillators, wave shapers, and filters. So this particular box has 5 filters in them. We've got Modcan multimode, Modcan CEM, this Buchler low pass gate, which you can just use as a filter as well, an MS-20 clone and a CS-80 clone. The MS-20 is the workhorse. It's the one that I use pretty much on every patch. I love it. The big thing though is not so much about the filters. Obviously, I think they're good sounding filters, but having them all here, I do a lot of looping. So for example, something goes in and then you send it out, you send one to the next stage like the envelope, but then you loop the filter back into itself, which is pretty common. I think it's been done on many a hardwired synth. So I think perhaps the Moog LP had that knob which was drive, which I think somehow does some kind of recycling back into the filter. Or of course there was that mini Moog trick where you plug the headphone out back into the mixer. So I do a lot of that, but the cool thing with a modular is you can do stuff like say you go into one filter and then the output goes to the rest of the chain, but then you send another one to say the CS80 filter and then loop that one back. So you're overdriving however the CS80 is done, rather than just simply overdriving the whole thing. So you can get cool effects where sort of like the resonant peak is overdriving in a different way to something else. So I think that's sort of one of the big values for me in terms of going modular, is that it makes that kind of stuff a bit easier. I don't get into a lot of the weird sort of like trigger patterns and that kind of stuff in the modular world, but that's really what I want. I do want to be able to do funky routings and stuff like that. Then getting to the bottom, yeah, stock standard, LFOs, more LFOs, envelopes, VCAs, that kind of thing. Digital oscillator, I think sort of works on wavetables. This has got some really nice sounds and it's very lo-fi. It gets a lot of aliasing and stuff like that. However, I've never been able to get the little bastard to track in tune, and that has limited its usefulness. The Chaos oscillator, this is really cool. You can get some cool effects. So what this will do, and this is quite a common unit now in Eurorack, is it'll give you an LFO, but it'll give you 4 outputs and they'll be out of phase. So let's say your first one is, it's hard to show without picture, but if it was 180, if you go for 180 out of phase, obviously when one LFO is up, the other one's down. But you also get 90 and whatever the other one will be. So that's kind of cool. Like if you're doing like a theremin effect, you can send one to one oscillator and another to another oscillator if you want 2 oscillators, and the up and down of the vibrato can be phased, and you get sort of a different effect through that. Then the Chaos oscillator, I do not understand. You put things in and it mangles them, and sometimes cool things happen. Yeah, whatever. Yes, I did read the manual and I was none the wiser. This is a noise ring. Essentially, it's best to think of it as random voltage generators, but it's not really random. It's sort of random, but not random. Probably the last one of note here is actually this preamp, which is basically if you wanted to plug your bass into the modular or something like that, you need a preamp. But this also will extract like gate patterns and stuff like that, so you can create, that filtered effect where you dong on the bass. Dong. Moving on. This is a Voyager. This is obviously a kind of unique Voyager in that it's got white buttons and a purple backlight, which I don't think we can catch. They're all purple, lots of purple. Obviously, with the stuff that I'm into, with all the weird routing and whatever, this, is probably a bit too bread and butter for me. So what this guy tends to get used as, other than as the world's most expensive MIDI controller, is I also, when you're starting a song and you want a couple of layers just running live as you try different things and different arrangements before you commit to recording anything, this guy is at the start of every song, always gets recorded, usually gets deleted later. Occasionally it lasts through. It is not a bad sounding synth by any means, but I'm into, odd sounds, I guess, and sort of those really textured kind of things, which this guy doesn't really do so much. But I love having it here, and it's great for starting songs. Okay, cool. So now we're just moving on to the Eurorack, which is sort of the series of latest acquisitions. And as you can see, there are some notable holes of self-improvement to come. Up for rent. Impress me with your modules. It's a very different world, Eurorack. So whereas in 5U, you're buying from some guy who would essentially make it in their garage and wait for months to get it, or years, Paul. This is different. Eurorack is huge. In most cases, you order a module, and even in Australia, because I'm usually ordering from the States, it's here in like 3 days. And it's just so easy and just much more commercial. Also, because of that, if you're into Eurorack, you'll recognize what's here. There's maths. Everybody has maths. There's my maths, my perfectly standard maths unit. So what I thought I would do with this one is not so much go through module by module. These are modules that anybody into Eurorack has or considered having and didn't get. But rather, I just wanted to sort of give some shout outs into the modules that I really, really love and use to death. So to that end, I thought I would actually start with our old friend Paul again. So Synthesis Technology, Cloud Terranium. So this is a digital oscillator. It does wavetables. It does hypersaws or clouds, whatever you want to call it. And it does FM. This I am using to death. I actually maintain that Mr. Paul Schreiber is probably one of the greatest designers in synths that has ever been. Everybody thinks of Moog, I think of this guy. So just, I don't know, everything he does sort of touches, it just turns to gold. So this guy, digital oscillator, using it on most of the new stuff, particularly the FM. Obviously, most of my stuff is analog, so FM can be a bit unstable in the analog world. This is digital, it gives you perfect FM, and just using it to death, particularly FM using wavetables, which is just sort of wild, and a very big departure from what I'm used to with the old square waves and sine waves and so on. The next one I wanted to mention is I'm not going to say this correctly, neither the brand nor the filter, XOAC, however you want to say that, Belgrade, whatever, it is a filter. It's a filter, essentially it's got two filters, and you can choose what type. Going here, so for example, you can have a high pass and a low pass simultaneously, and so on. What's really special about this one, the filter designs sound good, as you would hope, but also that it has options to cross-modulate the two filters. So this is, it's actually kind of lazy. I would do this with my other filters, so you send the signal to two places and you have one filter output modulate the other filter's cutoff. This has little switches. It sounds just beastly. So this one in combination with some wavetables is just amazing. And it's sort of actually changed the sound of what I'm doing quite a bit. It's been really, really cool. The last one probably the last two things I wanted to mention was just one, the woggle bug. Hey, look at it woggle. Yes, and that's the only explanation you need. Simply put, this puts out random voltages in a musical kind of way. And when you first think of that, you sort of start thinking of like sample on hold, R2D2 kind of stuff. But I actually use it mostly for things like FM amount or FM tuning, or filter cutoffs, all kinds of stuff. And it just sort of gives this organic feel, I think, more than anything, where you get these sort of natural variations. And that's been really big. I do want stuff to sound organic, even though, it's not really the most associated thing with electronic music. Which is actually a nice segue to what I've really been getting into lately, which is Vactrals, low pass gates. I hope Vactrals is the right term there. So what this is getting away from like the usual VCA sort of thing, which you'd get in most synths, and I hope I'm getting this right. Works on light emitting diodes and so on. You use this as like the VCA essentially. But it sounds much more sort of like a pluck sound or like a piano sound, depending what you're putting into it, where the amplitude and the frequencies that it allows through have this sort of relationship together. As it gets quieter, it also sort of cuts off a bit, and you get this incredibly organic sound. So it's been this weird transition in getting to this stuff, where getting more into digital oscillators, but also getting into that sort of random voltage generation and the low pass gates. So yeah, big change. I'm really getting into this, and hopefully you hear it more in the future. This is the rack where everything gets recorded. So what this is, just to run through it quickly, is here are my ADDA converters, which it's a Link Aurora 16. I don't think they make exactly this model anymore. So that's just giving you 16 in, 16 out. Patch bay for organizing all of that. This is a monitor controller. So you just get volume, because of course this has no volume control on it, as well as being able to choose alternate speakers and alternate sources and that kind of thing. This is a summing mixer. So basically you would use something like this when you're mixing down a song. You've got 16 channels out, will go into this, it'll spit out 2 channels back. This is a 500 series rack, which obviously only has one module in it, which is a Shadow Hills preamp. The last one is a analog compressor, a cool tube. This one I actually record through as well, not so much to use the compressor, but it has Lundahl transformers in it, and I do think they do something quite nice to the sound. The other side of what I do is I actually still do quite a bit of mastering. When I do master, two things I tend to do is one, if the person wants it, I'll do the multi-tracks. So, I'll be sent the multi-tracks. I'll run it through the summing. I think it's good. I maintain it's good. Before going to mastering. When I do master, I typically do run it through this guy. Again, not using the compressor. I'll do the compression actually in the box. But again, just to pick up the goodness of the transformers. It's just this sort of nice sheen to the sound. I use Logic. Pete uses Cubase. They are equally good as each other in every possible way, and there is no reason to talk or debate that. Okay, last thing, the pedal board. Probably best place to start is the end of the chain. This is a Subway bass DI, which is great for recording. So one of the things I really like about it is, depending on how you rig it up, you can actually have simultaneously like a mic level output and line outputs and so on. And what you can also do with this is use the throughput and do stuff like record a clean bass sound and then record another layer which is through fuzz pedals and so on simultaneously. No problems. It's really easy. So really good versatile box. I find it really useful. Doesn't do a lot of what some of the other DI boxes do. There's no overdrive or amp sim or anything like that. It's just pure goodness. It's pure, let's get your bass signal into a signal that can be worked with other bits of gear. Other than that, on this pedal board, some fuzz. So probably my favorite fuzzes are this guy, which is a Devi Ever pedal. I think she might have stopped these days, but great fuzz pedal. Pretty much gives you a saw wave, because apparently I don't have enough saw waves in my life, and I need a way to make a perfectly normal sounding instrument to a saw wave. This is a Mastertron, which is based on the woolly mammoth design. Really, the variation between this and a woolly mammoth is because I have an active bass and I have, buffers and stuff like that sitting before the fuzz. This basically has some kind of witchcraft in it that will make that okay. Normally, you'd want a passive instrument going into the fuzz first. I have too much other stuff going on. This somehow compensates with a knob. Boss Super Octave, which is pretty standard. This is a Dark Glass Alpha Omicron. It's an distortion. Sounds very, very nice, very nice and compact and very well made. Low and high pass filter, which is just to filter the highs and lows. This is actually quite important, particularly when you're using fuzz. You can put out some very extreme low-end rumble and stuff like that. This will clean it up. If you're playing live, the sound engineer will love it because you're not just sending shit out to the front.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Danke.
And we will wrap it up.
No, that's it. So that's the studio.
All right. Bye.
Done.